Hi, I'm Albert Pasaoa.
Hello, my name is Kevin Jeffries.
And this is the 635 Podcast. The 635 Podcast is about local politics, economics, and social and cultural issues in the Alvin Community College area. The views expressed on the show are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of Alvin Community College. All right, I'm here with Karina Lovas, and today we're going to talk about media, modern media, and how it operates. Did I characterize what we're going to talk about correctly?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So tell me, what is modern media, and how does it apply to our lives?
So, of course, like media, whether it's the news or entertainment, right, is a big part of our lives all the time. You know, you're inundated with information, whether it's national or international news or information, whether it is, you know, local stuff of like, you know, there's a pileup on I-45, you know, from traffic news all the way to crime reporting and all of that. So when, you know, asked to kind of talk about something, I've just been thinking a lot about just the way that we get all that information has changed. And I wanted to kind of talk about that in that kind of context of like, how do we get where we are, you know, politically, and with all of that, the media that gives us that kind of information that is the basis of like our political culture and political ideology that a lot of us have.
What's our baseline? What's our baseline of comparison? Like, if we're going to say, okay, things have changed, well, compared to what? What's the starting point, and then from there we've changed. Are we going to the three big networks on TV or something like that?
I wanted to like go all the way back, you know, to that. So, you know, TV is of course going to like be a big political kind of transformation in news. So previously, when it was just radio, when it was just, you know, print reporting, like a lot of things you didn't really need to worry about. It's okay if you're not that attractive, right? It's okay if you talk or if you have weird body language in a debate, or in that kind of stuff. But with the advent of TV, that's going to, you know, dramatically change all of that. So I kind of an interesting thing to think about is that in 1960, the presidential election is the first time that we have a televised debate, and it's between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. So Richard Nixon was vice president at the time. He was a very experienced, he was very well known, kind of an elder statesman kind of guy. Like, you know, we as Americans, not like us personally, knew him as you know, being part of like the HUAC committee during the Red Scare kind of Cold War stuff. We knew him, you know, as vice president and in the Senate and all of this stuff. So he's like very well known, very experienced kind of guy. And then John F. Kennedy, who was known because his family was political, is very much a newcomer in politics. He's younger. And then when we're watching the debate, John F. Kennedy looks handsome. He is charismatic. The way he appeals to the camera is very, you know, charismatic, and people like it and all of that. However, good old Richard Nixon, who probably was more prepared in answering questions and definitely more of an experienced politician, he was sick at the time. He had like some kind of virus. Oh, wow. And he just looked gross and weird and like sweaty, and you know, and he didn't appeal to you as a viewer in the same way that John F. Kennedy did. So when they, you know, polled Americans, people who had watched it thought that John F. Kennedy had won, but people who listened to it and didn't watch it, didn't see, you know, thought that Nixon sounded better. So, you know, that starts to change things. And at the beginning of TV, there's a lot less TV, right? There's a lot less networking and programming and all of that. Broadcast is limited. So when you're getting news, it's generally, you know, just a couple hours a day. You might have a morning news show, and then one or two in the evening, you know, your 11 o'clock local news. And then there might during primetime be like an hour of national news, right? Your CBS nightly news or whatever. And you know, TV even goes off the air generally at midnight. But so the way, you know, they're all you only have 30 minutes of news or whatever. So the local shows or the national shows are really pressed for what they can tell you. They're only going to pick certain stories, really important stuff, right? And newspapers also, are still around. They only run, one, maybe twice a day. So that is also limited. You have radio shows as well who play news a lot, but we don't really see this kind of like transformation in the news cycle until cable news becomes a thing.
That's right. Now, when did that start?
So cable, so these premium channels that you pay to get to, doesn't really become a thing, I think, until the 60s. But it's not super popular. Like most people are like, why would I pay for that? They have to really sell it to you. Like, this is why you need additional TV. And so it starts to get more and more popular in the 70s. And by the 80s, it's super popular. And of course, the big thing that's going to sort of transform news is going to be CNN, or Cable News Network, which starts in 1980.
So they were there before Fox. They were in the cable news. Okay.
So CNN, comes onto the air in 1980, and now it's not just like Jeopardy and whatever else. I don't even know Jeopardy was on the air in the 70s. And then an hour of news. It's news all the time. And
you've got to fill that with something.
Right. And they're competing, for your attention. They need to make it in such a way that you want to watch them and get money for their advertisers and whatnot, instead of whatever is on whatever other channel, whatever sports game or whatever else is competing. So that is going to change the things that they talk about, how they talk about it. And also, there's a lot more time to fill, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you're going to have these commentary shows where they're going to start reporting and speculating and talking about things that they might not have done previous to, or they probably wouldn't have, because there would have been enough time, right? Before we have, the cable news. And so I have two kind of examples of stories that I think kind of exemplify our shift into this 24-hour news cycle.
Okay.
So the first, which you may or may not be familiar with, was Baby Jessica in 1987. Are you familiar with Baby Jessica?
Wow.
Okay, so Baby Jessica was a baby. She was about 18 months old, and she lived in Midland, Texas, so out in oil country.
All right.
And she was like out in a backyard, a field, I don't know, some sort of area. And her mother like answered the phone, because back in the day you had to go and answer the phone. And it wasn't in your pocket. And Baby Jessica was running, and she fell into like a little hole that was outside, and it was very narrow. It was like 8 inches, and it was like a well shaft, and she fell down into the hole.
Ooh.
I can't remember how far down she was, but she was really far down. And her she was just wedged in there, like in the splits, essentially. And this is a baby. So of course, EMS and stuff is there, and rescuers are on hand, and this is like a big story. So, within a couple of hours, you have national news, like outside of these people's home in Midland, Texas, like broadcasting, about this story of this baby in the well. Baby Jessica in the well. And so because now it's not just like, next at 10 o'clock, Baby Jessica stuck in a well, where they mentioned it in passing, it is now all of this time that they're talking about it. So people become very, very, very invested, probably sometimes in like an unhealthy kind of way, in this story, because they can't free her for a long time. It takes like 60 hours. And there are reporters there constantly. And then, when they would go back to commentators, they would talk about the family and like what all is going on about that. And so there's a lot of national attention, to the point, where millions and millions of people like watch when they bring her out of the well.
Oh, nice.
She survived.
Oh, yay.
Yay. And this is a huge, huge thing. And there's like a Simpsons episode where they mention this. So like it is a huge like kind of pop culture, but also, it has political attention too. Like Ronald Reagan makes an announcement basically after she is, safely, I mean, she was injured a little bit, but she's okay. And from the well, and, talks about how millions of Americans feel like they're her godparents. She goes to the White House. She like throws out the first pitch at like a Rangers game, some baseball game. And, so it's a huge thing. So, it's not to say that Americans wouldn't have cared about a baby stuck in a well before CNN, right? But CNN gives us the ability to sort of be constantly inundated with that kind of information and, and affected and they're seeing that it's drawing viewership. So they're going to make big deals about that.
When's the next baby Jessica? Dig around, everybody. We need another one.
Well, and I think they're even kind of spared now, because now there would even be more speculation on social media about, their parents and like, this is what they tweeted in 2011. And like, so I'm sure it was a horrifying ordeal for them in 1997, but luckily, also, she was young enough that she doesn't really remember any of it. And like when you're a baby, like, it was horrible, but she doesn't, she doesn't remember that. And she did all this cool stuff, but she also doesn't really remember that. When you're a baby, like everything is kind of equally exciting, right?
Yeah. But I could see them having to milk it, right? You gotta answer, how did she get stuck in this well?
What were the parents doing?
Yeah.
And then there's also like attention on the rescuers. So an unfortunate thing of this is there was so much attention on the guy who actually rescued her that he kind of had PTSD from the whole thing. He later ends up taking his own life.
Wow.
So, and it brought all this attention to like Midland in a way that we hadn't really, they probably weren't really prepared for. So
was this good or bad attention? What kind of attention?
I think there was some like criticism like of the family and like, are they using their money and that they're getting from these donations in the right way? But I think a lot of it like was kind of good. I mean, there were people in the town who like put up reporters because there weren't enough hotels. And wow. So it was just something that was completely unprecedented for this kind of like small town in Texas that I've never even been to. I don't really know now how big or small it is, but, it was relatively small.
Is there a monument there? Baby Jessica as
probably. Well? I think Jessica, now in her 30s, still lives there. And I think she's like, for the most part, like relatively well adjusted for someone who, was such it was a huge story.
She's not trying to milk it. That should be your podcast. Well adjusted. You get it?
I didn't even get it. That is funny. She could. But she hasn't. I think all the donations that she got that were like in her name were put in a trust for her that she couldn't access until she was an adult. So, hopefully that has benefited her adulthood.
How much was it?
I don't know.
I mean, you would figure, nowadays GoFundMe or something.
Yeah. But now, then you had to people wrote checks to baby Jessica and mailed it to them.
Although, nowadays I could imagine people doing let's do a fake baby Jessica, then do a GoFundMe or something.
Maybe about 10 years ago, there was that fake story of the family who said that the kid was in a hot air balloon and then he wasn't. Do you remember that?
Wow.
Balloon boy.
I probably ignored that or something.
So maybe they were trying to be a baby Jessica, but they didn't succeed. And luckily the little kid was not actually in the balloon.
Oh,
so that was good.
Oh, there was a balloon up there.
Yeah, I think so.
And then,
the kid was hiding or
little
something.
kids. Oh, that's smart.
Yeah.
Not smart. I could see. They was very shrewd. But
yeah. So there are other stories and stuff, but I think that sort of brought to light, number one, to CNN how many viewers and all that, that this sort of reporting would bring in. Another thing that is really credited with a lot of this kind of beginning of what we call the 24-hour news cycle is the OJ Simpson case.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
All right. That's my era now. Okay. I remember that.
Yes. So OJ Simpson, was a very well-known figure. He had played for USC in football. He was a Heisman winner. He went on to play for other teams that probably, I think he played for the Bills. I don't know who else he played for.
And I mainly knew him for his cameos. I think he was on Naked Gun or something like
Yeah,
that.
and then he was so popular as a football figure. He was in other stuff. He
Commercials.
Yeah, he was in the Enterprise commercials where he would like run through airports and stuff for rental car. I don't know. And so he was very well known and a popular figure. So in 1994, there is this very high profile murder of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and this other guy, Ron Goldman. And their CNN, makes a meal out of this. Not only, is this a high figure thing, it's like a big crime. It's in LA where, a lot of things are centered. And then you also have this in the context of like criticism of Los Angeles police because of Rodney King in 1992 and all this. So there's all this attention on the crime itself and the the linkages to OJ Simpson. And then when he starts to be accused and he's going to be arrested for said crime, you have the chase, and I say chase in a very casual way because it was more of a slow speed pursuit, right, in the Bronco, which I always thought was his Bronco, but it was his like teammate's Bronco.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
The Bronco, and he's actually in the back seat with like a gun to his head, and they're negotiating with him. They're driving at a very slow speed, and so TV stations all over the country cut in. So it's not only on CNN, but like local stations cut in to show this car chase of OJ Simpson and the white Bronco. So in fact, in Houston, the Rockets were playing in the NBA championship.
Oh, wow.
And they cut in to that game, one of the games. I can't remember which game it was. I want to say it was Game 7, but I think that would be too dramatic. They cut into some game. So people in Houston are like, I don't want to watch this. Show me the game. Because the game didn't stop, right? But they're just showing the chase instead of the game.
Well, help remind me the sequence. Did everyone already know the murders happened and then he ran? Yeah.
So the murders have already. It was. I don't know how long it was after the murders. It was a couple days, I think.
Okay.
But they had been making arrangements because the police were like, "Okay, man, you need to turn yourself in," because he was going to be arrested for the murders. And he had an agreement that he was going to go and turn himself in, be arraigned for the murders, but he decided to not and to run away in the Bronco going very slowly. And I think they were trying to talk him off an edge because they thought, that he was suicidal. Eventually, it all gets talked down and he gets arrested. And so when the trial actually happens, this is huge news, right? So the United States has always been interested in crime reporting, but this kind of like in the courtroom sort of 24-hour like access to this whole trial is making a lot of people a lot of money. So not only are you seeing what happens every day, but you also hear the recap of it. So they're gonna the reporters and the anchors and stuff on CNN are speculating on what the district attorney is doing and what the defense team is doing and what it meant that OJ did this and what it meant, what this person said on the stand and all of that. So it's just and it's not always the nicest reporting. They're the way that they talk about the district attorney, the woman, and is not very...
Marsha Clark.
Yeah, Marsha Clark.
Obviously Judge Ito. Let me see.
Oh, that's a good memory. Judge Ito.
There was one of the other prosecutors.
I can't remember his name.
Darren. And then was there was there a Shapiro who was
Yeah.
on? There were so many. He had several people.
Yeah, so he had Shapiro, and then also Robert Kardashian was a friend of the Simpson family, and he was an attorney. Although he wasn't I guess he wasn't like a defense attorney really. He wasn't. He didn't do criminal law, but they had him like get his license in California so that he could be on the defense team. So of course this is like Courtney and Kim and the other one's dad. That's kind of how America gets introduced to the Kardashian family. So there's lots of layers to this, really.
Wow.
And so yeah, all this like speculation and whatnot that hadn't really happened before. Before there was kind of a more controlled narrative of like what happened in a court case and like what happened that day in a trial or whatever. But this is like a complete free-for-all, and everyone is very, very, very invested to every kind of like minute detail of this case.
I remember watching that and just all the characters. It's I mean, it had everything, and you had corruption, the LAPD, and then all their little characters. It was very, very colorful show. I don't know if it's just because if you pay enough attention, everyone's interesting, or that it's legitimately all very interesting.
I don't know. I mean, probably it was a little more interesting than normal things, but like and also something to keep in mind is that this was also really kind of the first really high profile case that utilized DNA evidence. So people weren't really familiar with that, and a lot of people, I guess particularly on the jury, didn't really trust the DNA evidence. Today, if we had that kind of DNA evidence, you'd probably be like, well, yeah.
I could imagine that.
It indicates a strong semblance of guilt.
I can imagine the defense playing that up. It's like, what is this DMA
Yeah, how
stuff?
do we know where it came from?
Sounds like magic to me.
Yeah. And so, like, this played a huge, huge role, right, in kind of the transformation of number one, crime reporting, but also just kind of the our continual 24-hour access to these kinds of stories. So this is kind of if we weren't before, which I think we probably were in the 80s, but we're definitely in this kind of 24-hour news cycle then, as of the OJ Simpson case and the famous acquittal in 1995.
I guess that's the playbook. You find out some event, and then you just dive into every single detail of that event and try to make it go around the clock for as long as you can, and then then move on to the next thing. Right?
Well, and I think that we still, this still happens. Like, people like who are on shows who do a lot of crime reporting, you're like Nancy Grace's or whatever, they will pick a case and that is what they focus on for forever. If you think back to like the Casey Anthony trial, or more recently, the murder case in Idaho of the university students like a couple months ago. And the people are like very enthralled by those kinds of stories. Like we're horrified and interested and like want reassurance that like this is happening there and it wouldn't happen here. And we want to think that, I guess, I don't know, that someone is guilty and all of that. So I think absolutely like CNN responsible for a lot of this kind of shift into this 24-hour cycle. But I kind of mentioned two things that aren't necessarily like political, but had political ramifications. But I think there are kind of the CNN does allow focus on certain political stories that might not have had the airtime before. So kind of for good sometimes. So if you think back to the reporting on the Tiananmen Square situation in China in the late 80s, that probably wouldn't have been too much of a story, in our reporting here in the States, had it not been, CNN had a lot of time to fill. They might as well talk about that.
CNN was there in time to they covered.
Yeah, they covered
Tiananmen
it.
Square? Okay.
And they, talked about it a lot in their various shows and brought more attention to it than it might have gotten otherwise. Another thing that they talked about a lot and are credited with spurring the U.S. response to was the Bosnian civil war in the early 90s.
Yeah.
You know, so there was lots of reporting coming out of Bosnia in the 90s about, you know, the atrocities happening there, genocide and whatnot. And if it wasn't for the reporting of CNN and the kind of like people talking about like, you know, after the Holocaust, we said never again, but this is happening here, you know, and people calling for something, the U.S. probably wouldn't have gotten involved. You know, and maybe that is good or bad depending on how you think, but like definitely, you know, that sort of reporting plays a role in that. So, you know, there's things to keep in mind. So at this point, like up until like the late 80s, basically all of the cable news and network news, they are trying to be as salacious as possible, right? They're trying to attract viewers. They want you to stay tuned, to watch them instead of whatever, so they can tell you, you know, all the things that are happening. However, they are still having to adhere to something called the Fairness Doctrine. Have you heard of the Fairness Doctrine?
Vaguely.
So the Fairness Doctrine was an FCC rule, the Federal Communications Commission, which is an entity that was created in the 1930s during the New Deal to basically license TV stations and radio stations. And so it, you know, if you think to like other FCC rules, they have rules on like what you can and can't show on TV and what you can and can't say on TV. So if you swear on, you know, TV, you can get in trouble. They're CNN or not CNN. There's like SNL people, right? They get fired because it costs Lorne Michaels money if you swear on TV. They have to pay that fine. If you think back, like way back in early like sitcoms, you know, they would only show couples like in two twin beds. People didn't used to sleep in twin beds like with their spouse in a twin bed next to them, right? But that's what they could show on TV. So
interesting.
If you think of like old sitcoms, that's why they showed that. So those are like FCC, there's FCC rules on all sorts of things. But so one of them was called the Fairness Doctrine. And the Fairness Doctrine was that if you were presenting any kind of like controversial opinion or information, you had to show both sides of the issue. So if you were going to bring up, let's say like abortion in a news broadcast or whatever, you had to show both sides of that, which is, you know, reasonable, right? And so it really prevented any kind of like super partisan reporting because you had to show both sides.
And this rule applied to just the TV networks?
And cable.
And cable?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and that is the law of the land. And the Supreme Court upholds the FCC's authority to enforce said rule several times, including like during the Civil Rights era. They're like, you know, you can't just show segregationist stuff on TV networks. And, you know, their reasoning is that some places don't have as many networks, so they shouldn't just show one side of something. You know, so if you only have access to, you know, 2 channels living in like a rural area, you know, that you should hear both sides, which is very reasonable, right? But in 1987, they abolish the Fairness Doctrine. So
1987?
87. Right. So after that, you know, and some like stations and broadcasters are still going to abide by this, right? They're still going to show both sides of an issue. But especially like cable entertainment, they don't have to abide by it. So this allows for this kind of more biased and, you know, kind of one-sided stations and whatnot to emerge. So in 1996, we have the launch of Fox News, you know, which is going to cater more to conservatives and Republicans. And along with that, also the same year, MSNBC is launched or established or whatever as well, has the news for branch off of NBC, and that's going to, you know, be a little bit more left-leaning and more kind of sympathetic to Democrats and whatnot. And then for a while, like kind of CNN is a little in the middle, maybe it leans a little bit left, and then you have a kind of a move more left, and then you kind of have a move more center right. So somewhere in the middle. So now you don't need to, you know, talk about both sides of the issue. You can have, these entertaining news shows that are, completely only one side. And that is, what gets us into these like highly partisan, news segments that are very highly watched. And by, the early 2000s, Fox News is the most watched network or cable network as far as news goes. And I think that, that definitely has effects because a lot of the information that people get, doesn't have to show both sides. You can pick the side you want to hear and only hear that. And so I think a thing that this affects for sure is going to be the Bill Clinton scandal in the late 90s. Yes.
Okay.
I don't know how much you remember about that.
Yeah, I remember a lot, but I never thought to pay attention to comparing the coverage, like the types of coverage. I don't even know what I was watching. I just remember seeing it on TV, and I don't know if it was network or cable.
Yeah, but like the way that it's portrayed in kind of the cable medium, whether it's on MSNBC or Fox News or CNN, is going to be a lot different than how it's reported, in like local news segments. But it's gonna trickle down to there too. It's like, how salacious can we make this story, and how can we present this to viewers in a way that, is going to, number one, make them mad, and two, that they're going to keep watching and learn all these, like, it combines everything, like corruption and lying and sex and all the things, that make for good television programming.
No matter how sympathetic CNN might have been towards Clinton, you just got to go after the big story. That is just too tempting for anybody to turn down, right?
And that kind of comes at the time where there had been kind of a shift to the Republicans being more conservative for one, and having more control of Congress than they'd had in a while, and that definitely manifested in the way that the reporting of the story takes place. Like, certainly many presidents have had affairs. Certainly many presidents have lied about affairs. But, like, it was the right kind of conditions and political volatility to, like, make it a huge thing. And, the networks are going to, like, absolutely capitalize on that, right? And the kind of partisan rhetoric is going to be very, damning for a lot of people. And apparently I just got, like, some news things in my inbox earlier. It's like the 25th anniversary, so they're like interviewing Monica Lewinsky and stuff.
Where are they now?
Oh, poor thing. So, with the increased like polarization, there's like infinite time to fill and so much competition. News is incentivized to report in ways that attract those things, which are going to contribute to, how polarized the parties are, and like, also, it affects a lot of other things as well, our perceptions of crime, and, what we think should be done about that, and other things as well. So I think that's just interesting context to kind of think about when we're thinking about, like, why are there so many stark differences in political opinion, and like why are the parties unwilling to compromise. I think a lot of this reporting and stuff kind of, and the partisan television kind of factors into that. So, and with social media, you can be even more discerning, right? You can read only, the people that you like and want. And that definitely factors into it as well.
So let's see, in the next 8 minutes or so, what's your take on sort of the post-Clinton? What happens after that? I mean, how do you think things have changed since then?
Well, so I think, like, beginning really with Clinton and going forward, of course there is, and even a little bit before Clinton, there's a lot more focus on your personal life than probably there used to be, right? Because we have way more access. It used to be, you barely saw these people on TV. Of course, you don't care about what they did.
Uh-huh.
So I think that is absolutely going to affect like politics and stuff going forward. Like, you know, you have to be constantly aware that, number one, like people can be filming you at all times, and there could be like a viral TikTok of you being rude to a waiter or something.
Yeah.
And so that's going to affect the political process. And also, you know, you know, I think just like I don't know if there really has been that much change in this kind of like polarization and unwillingness to kind of compromise on a lot of issues. And some of that is going to feed into this kind of like personal hatred towards politicians of the other party. And I think we kind of, you know, see some of that today. You know, there are certain politicians who like talk about, you know, someone who's president or used to be president with so much personal disdain that they didn't used to have before.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of kickstarts with Clinton when, you know, a lot of the Republican like House members and Republican senators like talked about him like he was the devil himself. And, you know, and reporters too. And maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but like you didn't used to kind of hear that sort of personal reporting quite as much.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely, you know, when you make it emotionally charged, when you talk in personal terms, that definitely gets attention.
Sure.
Right. And that's, I guess, when there's media outlets willing to give you that much time, that's, you know, it sort of incentivizes you to, you know, talk in these terms to get that coverage.
And I think now, if you like want to go in politics, there's so like you're kind of making a decision for your entire family. So, you know, for the daughters of like Lyndon Johnson, like sure, like they would appear at events and people like knew them, and you know there was press attention when one of them got married at the White House. But for the most part, they could kind of live their own normal lives. But you know, with this media cycle and the way it changed it with social media, like, you know, there is going to be so much scrutiny on the children and wives and family of political people that you kind of have, you know, like making a decision for your kids to like live their lives in a way where there's going to be constant criticism and attention to them.
Yeah, and there's eyes everywhere with cameras. You know, they can, you know, their classmates or anybody else around, if they know who you are, you know, they can just upload it to, you know, Twitter, YouTube, and you get the sort of the negative attention.
Right.
And what I noticed about sort of this modern era is that politicians, because they can just tweet stuff, they're almost obligated to have an opinion on everything at every moment of the day.
I think that's a good point too.
So it's just this constant, you've got to always be putting out messages, and any conflict there is, you're just going to constantly continue, you know, you'll just have this constant, you know, verbal warfare with whoever your, you know, rivals are. And I see that a lot, you know, on Twitter with like so many senators and congresspeople who are very outspoken and will openly, you know, like call each other out and ridicule each other. And it's, you know, memes, they're engaging in meme warfare now. So.
And maybe they used to like, you know, like make snotty comments to each other, like by their desks in the Senate. But like now it's like we can literally all see it. And I think that it plays into it too. And also for, you know, previously, if you didn't care about OJ Simpson, you would simply like not watch the reporting on it, right? Except when it cuts in over the Rockets game, and then you have no escape. But you know, with social media, you kind of have to. You see, if you're on Twitter or on your Facebook or your TikTok or whatever, like you see some of that stuff like constantly, and you know, you might form opinions and like cares about something deeply. You know, and be mad about, you know, whatever senator said what, you know, when previously you might not have been. And, you know, that can be good. You're more informed than maybe you used to be. But also it can be like kind of trapping you in a cycle of like, I'm mad all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I got to wonder if it would be better if, you know, rather than, you know, every hour there's some sort of political strife that they give each other a week to talk it over, you know, behind closed doors, and then they come out and talk. So that, but now it's just this constant sniping, and to be honest, I think it's part entertainment. That type of warfare, and you know, it attracts eyeballs, and so I just don't know how we could, you know, unless we change the various algorithms.
Right.
You know, I'm not sure how we could solve that problem.
Yeah, and you know, unless we start to like, you know, as everyone being way more discerning with like what we click on and what we watch, you know, mandating that they switch. You know, I just don't think that there's like an incentive for media companies to do that.
Yeah. You know, I did get called out by the Twitter algorithm because I was on the 635TX on Twitter, and there was an interesting article. I think it was probably something about tech or something. And but I have to admit, I read the headline of the article as well as the comment, and I'm like, that's interesting. And so I wanted to share it. And then there was this pop-up that said, you did not read this article. Are you sure you want to share it? And then it just, I was like, ooh, I felt like it just called me out. And then what I do, I read the article, and then I probably still shared it. But it was something like that, like, gee, at least go beyond the headline. So
I have a friend who was trying to retweet an article that she wrote, and Twitter was like, you didn't read this. Are you sure you want to retweet? And she was like, yeah, I wrote it. So I thought that was funny. But yeah, I mean, that's probably good, though. You know, it doesn't want you to blindly retweet things.
Yeah. So, you know, who knows? Maybe, you know, there are little small nudges they can make here and there to improve things, but I just don't know. I don't see any major shifts happening. But who knows?
Oh, I wanted to say something about the Fairness Doctrine. So I made it seem like it was always really good, but there can be problems and drawbacks with the Fairness Doctrine as well, right? So because, you know, in a limited amount of time, they tell you about both sides of the issue, to a viewer, they might seem equally legitimate. So for instance, like if they're going to bring up like the issue of like vaccines or whatever, and they're talking about the like MMR vaccine, you know, they're going to show the scientists that are like, it's perfectly safe and good and it prevents this childhood illness. And then, you know, if they spend equal time of someone who's like, you know, vaccines cause autism, like to you, the viewer, those seem like, you know, equally legitimate views that you could have, when in reality, they're not, right? All that studies have been debunked. And so, you know, it's not to say that the Fairness Doctrine is always perfect and great and wonderful and like it's protecting us from all of these, you know, partisan things, because that's not necessarily true. So I don't know the answer of this.
Yeah, I mean, like,
someone in the middle.
Like implementing the Fairness Doctrine, I could see that that's going to end up taking a lot of discretion in deciding, like, is it worthwhile to show the other side if a flat earther comes out, or, you know, or you have to pull them out. But then, you know, you want the instant you put in discretion, of course, there's a potential for bias. So I could see how, you know, it would be tricky and problematic to try to enforce that. But,
for sure. I didn't want to make it seem like, you know, that this was the problem and only this, because, you know, there are other issues with the Fairness Doctrine as well. Yeah,
absolutely. So this is very informative. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And so that was Karina Lovas on media and the evolution of it. And it will continue to evolve. And I still want to do a deep dive on social media at another point. But until then, thanks a lot. And it was nice seeing you, Karina.